All right. We acknowledge the Bungalow people, the traditional owners of the land.
You need to press the right hand button.
Okay. We acknowledge the Bungalow people, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. Pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. So, welcome everybody. We have a couple of people online with us. So they're good. I take it. Yep. Well, not. Thank you. All right. We have
Just for the benefit of the audit committee members, the people that are online, we've got one councillor, one director, and 3 managers, so all internal staff members.
Thank you. I will assume they're in confidential locations. All right, we'll move to declarations of members' conflicts of interest. Is there any shaking of the head? All right, we'll note that there are no conflicts of interest or change of office that need to be noted, or any conflicts of any agenda item being discussed today. Move on to the minutes of the previous meeting of the 20 members and auditors discussion. Does that any of the committee require private discussion with the auditor? No, thank you. We'll note that. Well, sorry, no, we'll now move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, noting that on page 10 of the pack, there was a in confidence section that hasn't been included, but the minutes were distributed to all committee members, and thank you for your quick response. Very much appreciated. Put me to shame actually how quick it came back. But we will make sure that that is inserted into the minutes that are signed as per what were distributed to the committee after the last meeting. Are we comfortable to sign those minutes off? Good, that's accepted. We'll go for we have a mover of Laurie, we have a seconder of Pat. Vote, we've got nods, carried, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the business arising. Do you want to handle that? Arising? What do you want me to?
So,
all right, I'll keep going. So what we do have is the actions coming out of the last meeting, and we might go by annexure. We'll go to the first page 13. We're receiving an update on the continuity plans. So, Justin, are you going to give that update? Or?
Through the chair, I might ask our manager of governance, Irene Adair, to provide an update. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Stephen. I wanted to talk particularly around item number 1. The update expressed here talks about the 25% being the business continuity plan work. I'm happy to say that that work is actually developed rather quickly, and I would estimate this work to be at 50% or greater ratio, with all the sub-plans being returned from various managers. And so we'll be able to have a up-to-date business continuity plan as well as other emergency plans for the next meeting.
Thank you. Anything else on annexure A from any of the committee members? Any questions? No, we'll move on to annexure B. That's our scheduled meetings. Just note that the October 23 and the February 24, we don't actually comply with our terms of reference. If you will read that, we're meeting requirement each quarter, but we want to get closer to it. Annexure C, is there any questions from any committee members on annexure C? Yes, Lauren.
Yeah, my question was really around this question really around the different activities and how we come up with what we come up with, and just the process for either adding in any urgent items or potential changes or as we go.
Yes.
I just wanted to note that there are a few things that have been included there, but I'm overly concerned because the issues arising indicated that in fact these terms of reference are going to be updated. So hopefully they're updated and then obviously that we can evolve in it.
So that's the objective. We sign off on the terms of reference, council will recommend that council, if they then approve it. The work plan will then be formulated, added to based on that, and then we'll run a rule across that to make sure that it is achievable from a management point of view. And I'll come to you in a minute, Justin. Achievable from a management point of view, making sure that we've then got flexibility that if something comes along, we can deal with it, committee member, and not being rushed. So, Justin, did you want to speak on that?
Yes, just wanted to add, as reports come to the audit committee, there will be very recommendations that come out that will be added to the list. But at any audit committee, anything, if any member or the audit committee wishes to add other items to that program, we can do that at any time. The intent of this schedule is essentially to give you sort of a forward roadmap in terms of what items of business are coming, just so you're aware of that. But certainly it's as to whether you want to add, change or delete any of those items.
Thanks, Justin. Michael?
Through the chair, Kathy Jarrett, who's online, had a question. Her hand's gone down. Kathy,
Yeah, no.
do you want to speak?
Yes, thanks, Irene. I was just going to raise exactly the matters that Pat and Grant and Justin just said, so nothing further to add.
Thanks, Kathy. My objective will be each time we look at the forward agenda, and if any of those items are at risk, I encourage management to speak up so we can talk through that, and we'll be a little bit fluid in the plan going forward. Okay, we'll go to Annexure D, which has the updates from the external and internal reviews. Kathy, or did anybody want to speak? Justin, did anybody want to speak to that?
David has read, happy to respond to any questions.
Yeah, because I know there's some when resources are available. So the question is, when will that occur, and are any of these items at risk of not meeting their due date? Sorry, Pat, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually exactly what I was going to raise, particularly in relation to accounting policies. This was an item from November 21. Accounting policies not being up to date is something that, in my experience, auditors are particularly interested in. And so, and for a good reason. I guess I was minorly concerned.
Okay, so Justin, did you want to handle that, given that it runs across a range of areas, or do you want to go to Grant on that
I'll
one?
go to Grant first, and then I'll
Go to balance. Okay.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Yeah, so with this item, this is just something identified internally more for just updating of procedures and that sort of thing. So definitely wasn't highlighted by the external auditors as an item of concern. All of our policies are up to date and in accordance with their review schedules. This was just more digging deep down into sort of documentation of some processes, that sort of thing, and needing to review them and move them down with.
So is it a policy or a procedure?
More procedure. So it's sometimes the risk. So with our internal controls, there will often be a risk identified, but then there will be further wording around it. So it might say policies, but then it will talk about procedures, that sort of thing. So this is more of a continuous improvement one. It wasn't an item of concern for any draft process.
It's November 21. We're now moving into 23. Is it going to be dealt with soon, or is this a never item that's going to sit there for a while?
Good question. That's why I put it on there as when it hasn't been a higher priority one. As I said, it's not an area of any great concern, but it is still one that gets highlighted as we go through our reviews.
Through the chair, what we'll do is we'll amend the schedule when we bring it back to the next meeting. We'll break it down into the different accounting policies that may need to be reviewed and be more definitive in terms of timeframes. I think as the audit committee will be aware, accounting policies are always changing, and we're constantly reviewing things like model financial statements and the like in line with movements within the local government sector. So I think we need to be more prescriptive instead of having something generic as listed. So we'll fix that for next meeting.
Thank you. The key for me is if they're on there as a date, we need to focus on them because they're taken off. They're either relevant or they're not relevant going forward. All right, so that deals with all the business arising. Anything from any members? Do we need to know anything? Okay, so there is a recommendation. We know the business arising from previous meetings of the Audit and Risk Committee as well as external reviews. Do I have a mover? Thanks, Pat. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Laurie. We all in favour? Thank you. Hopefully I got that right. Okay, we'll move on to the item 2.1, review of audit and risk terms of reference. Thank you, everybody who submitted some recommendations. Kathy, I'm going to go to you if that's okay.
Yes, sure. Can everybody hear me okay?
It's soft.
Yep, terrific. Yes, so I will take the report as read with a couple of comments. Feedback that has been received from audit committee members has been incorporated in this new draft terms of reference. The function of the committee has been expanded from the previous high-level functions that were stated in the previous terms of reference, but are still consistent with the reforms that will be coming into effect in the Local Government Act towards the end of this year. There is and has been just a slight problem with the translation of the tracked changes version of this terms of reference into the clean version that was presented as part of this audit committee papers, whereby some of the items were actually missed in the clean version, particularly relating to the minutes and so on of what will be captured in audit committee meetings. And there are also some other minor changes that need to be made, mainly grammatical changes and removal of reference to procedures, so that we ensure that the committee's focus is at the policy and strategy level.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. I'll just hold you there. So on page 26 of the pack, so if you look at point 8 minutes of meeting, it then goes into 9 reporting. So what we'll do is in that track changes version you would have received as well, that section around the meeting of minutes is what should have gone into the final copy. So if we do approve those, it'll be subject to inclusion of that item that's set in the track changes side of it. So keep going, Kathy.
That's it from me, basically. I think that this terms of reference reflects very closely the functions of the Audit Committee as required of the Local Government Act, and is also a contemporary representation of the Audit Committee's operations. The functions as outlined in this terms of reference will, following the adoption of this terms of reference, or the recommendation from the Audit Committee for the adoption of this terms of reference by the Council, we will follow this up with a completely revamped work program for the Audit Committee. And as was stated in the previous option, the work program is an indicative work program which can be updated and changed as matters arise during the course of the term of the committee.
Thanks, Kathy. This is a journey for us. It's quite disclosive in relation to some of the activities. And talking with Kathy, that has been done partly as an education process for council as well, given the activities we'll be focusing on. So some items are included in here. You wouldn't normally go down to the level of being descriptive of what needs to be done. But that's more from, as I said, that education point of view. I'd see over time that we'd then step back and roll that up a little bit higher in years to come as we condition ourselves and the council in relation to the activities of an Audit and Risk Committee. So what I'll do, I'll open it up for comment, and I'll go to you, Pat, first, if I can.
Thank you. Yes, obviously they've changed significantly, now more comprehensive, and as a newly formed new committee, and I think that's probably not a bad thing, and we can evolve. Just noting what Kathy said, I note 5.6 is missing in these. I note 6.2.1. I just raise it. I don't really have an issue with it, but it talks about 6.2 talks about the committee being one that maintains independent judgment. Then 6.2.1 says must exercise any powers delegated by the council and in accordance with any directions of the council. I think I understand why that's there. On one reading, it's perhaps a little problematic, but it's probably not going to be an issue. So I sort of note it, but don't.
Yeah, well, let's talk through that, because I think you raise a very good point around that's very directive statement in terms of reference. Kathy, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you.
6.2 on page 621, page 25.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I think that if at the moment, I guess there are no powers delegated by the council to the committee at this point in time. There are specific functions of the committee that are within the committee's purview by reason of the Local Government Act. I think that the wording perhaps of 6.2.1 is not very well worded, in that the council under the Local Government Act has the power to delegate to the Chief Executive Officer, to other staff members, to committees, and in such delegation, a council can actually place some form of stipulation around how that delegation is to be exercised. So I think that clause is probably not well worded, and could do with some rewording.
And what if it was taken out totally, because the council can do what the council wants to do? This is our terms of reference. And if
Correct.
they want to give us a certain power or activity to do it, they'll do it. So
Yep.
what's the value of having that statement in there at all?
Absolutely, agree. If the council does delegate powers to the committee, then it is delegated, and it's not necessary in there. Agree. So we can delete that clause.
6.2.1.
Yep.
Hopefully that deals with that issue for you. Thank you for raising that. Any others?
7.3, this is really just a question, and it might be as a result of legislation, or it might just be a deliberate decision. The quorum for a meeting is 2. I'm just wondering if 2 out of 4 is enough for, or whether it should be 3. But again, I don't have a strong view. I'm just raising it.
Kathy, I'll go to you.
Sorry, some of what Pat just said cut out for me.
Okay, so we're on page 25,
Yep.
7.3, where it talks a quorum of a minimum of 2, or at least 2. The question is around, well, 2 out of 4. Is that
Yep.
appropriate? Should it be 3 out of 4?
I think, again, thank you for picking that one up. A quorum for the purposes of council is half plus 1. I think that having 2 in there is a leftover from when we were thinking that the total number of members on this committee would be 3. Given we've actually now gone to 3 independent members plus 1 council member, the quorum should be 3.
All right, dealt with them. So 7.3 will be amended to 3.
7.5, sorry, this is for Justin. Chief Executive Officer will attend all meetings. Again, I would have thought may, or at Justin's
Delegate.
or delegate, but otherwise, if we're going to have a meeting and you can't attend for some reason, it doesn't stop the meeting from being a valid meeting, but it is in breach of our terms of reference.
As through the chair, as has already been suggested, if we just put in brackets or delegate immediately following that, that provides for that situation.
I think we can put rather than will, may. And as an ex officio, normally the chief executive is able to attend, so we'll just change will to may. Fixes it there.
Note the comments previously about the minutes.
Sorry, through the chair, could I make I would like to just double check that 7.3 is not a requirement of the new reforms under the Local Government Act. So whilst you're talking and continuing through, I'll just quickly double check that.
Okay. You're talking 7.5, not 7.3?
Yes, sorry, 7.5. Yep.
Yep, good. Just making sure I was awake. You going, Pat?
There were a couple of other things, but I think I'll just leave them in a evolutionary thing, which was just references to things like us having to advise on the objectivity of an external auditor. I can advise on independence, but I'm not sure I could ever advise on objectivity.
I think that's a good point. I think we should change that one. So what page was that?
Sorry, that's 10.3.2.b.
10.3. Yeah, it should only be the independence.
If I may, again through the chair, just get Kathy to check that one as well. Just that language is likely to potentially have been picked up in terms of
Legislation.
reform. So
We'll have a look at that, but it's very difficult for us to talk on objectivity. We can talk on performance. We can do an assessment, independence, they make a declaration. So we'll check on that one. Okay, Pat, anything else?
A grammar issue, but I'm sure Kathy's picked that up.
Okay, we'll deal with grammar. I've got a few of those as well, so we'll grab those at the end.
Yeah.
Hey,
Nothing further from me, thanks.
Laurie?
My key one's really around the breadth and scope of activity, given the resource we have as a council to actually do everything that we're being asked to do. I would just make sure that whatever we're doing here, there is reference made to risk, and that we are focusing on issues of most significant risk, and our efforts are channeled in that area. So I hate to see a list of things and we create something we need to. So very much the focus on just being prudent from a risk perspective and keeping the focus on the things that are most material within the organisation, so we don't end up creating something bigger than what we need to. It's probably the key, but I think in terms of the content, it reads quite well.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. I think that's a point very well made. We've got to make sure, and that I think will come through our work program. We are focusing on the right things. But I think the key is our ability as a committee to work through the terms of reference, as well as management's ability to deliver on what we're expecting to bring. So I think we've always got to run that ruler across to making sure we can get the right outcome for what's in the terms of reference. From my perspective, I just have a range of grammar items in there and reference points, because there are certain clauses are pointing to bits that have moved on. So what we will do, Kathy, you got your hand up here. You've got something to come back on that 7.3.5 plus 10.3.2b, please.
No, not at this moment in time, because unfortunately I don't have my tracked changes of the Local Government Act here with me in Adelaide, which is showing the reforms that will come in November. I have just asked Sue King to head to my office to grab that, but what I'm wondering is whether or not the resolution of the committee for this particular item is that you do recommend that council adopts the revised Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference, provided at Annexure A as updated, taking into account the feedback from the Audit Committee and the requirements of the Local Government Act as to come into effect as part of the reforms later this year. Something along those lines, rather than documenting the specific changes.
Yep, I'm happy with that. We're just looking at the recommendation as it sits. So I recommend that the council adopts the revised Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference, provided as an annexure, subject to the inclusion of the identified changes. So includes the identified changes from the Audit and Risk Committee, and confirmation that the terms of reference comply with what's the words, Kathy? Comply with what legislation?
Comply with the Local Government Act.
Comply with the Local Government Act. So
As-
recommend that council. Yep.
Yeah, just comply with the Local Government Act, that'll be
Council
fine.
adopts the revised audit risk committee terms of reference provided, subject to the inclusion of identified changes by the audit risk committee, comma, minor grammatical updates and confirmation that the terms of reference comply with the LGA, full stop. Okay, so let's deal with that one first, because I think that's the key recommendation. So can I have a move for that? Thank you, Laurie. Seconder, thank you, Pat. All those in favour? Thank you, everybody. And we'll go now to a second motion. And our second motion is that we note that a revised audit risk committee work program will be presented to the May meeting. Mover, thanks Pete. The seconder, thanks Pat. All those in favour? Thank you, guys. And thank you, Kathy, for the work put in to getting that to the stage we're at the moment. That will be a living and working document. I'm sure we'll find things and say, well, how are we actually doing or complying with that requirement? And thank you to many members who provided those comments back to Kathy as well.
I think if I could just make a final comment, I think it will be a work in progress as the committee evolves and also as council evolves during this term. I think it will also evolve as different reforms under the local government legislation come into play, and also different actions such as the ASCOSA review of council and also as our risk maturity increases over time. So yeah, no, I think it'll be a good document.
Okay, we'll move on to item 2.2. Did you want to lead that one, or did you want to hand that one to?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Take it that the report's been read. So the intent of this report is to seek audit committee recommendation as to how the internal audit and service review program is delivered. There's some pros and cons of different models, which is outlined in the report. On the assumption at this point in time, subject to the committee's deliberations, if the committee confirms the view that the outsourced model is the appropriate source of service delivery, requesting the administration to then prepare a request for tender document, which we'll bring back to the next audit committee for review. And given that this is essentially a new function, a new program of council, seeking any other feedback that the audit committee wants to incorporate into the proposed service delivery approach, noting that we've identified 5 areas, services to be subject to a service review in the first instance, provide the audit committee an opportunity, if you, for whatever reason, think that we need to change that list of 5, we can have that discussion and debate so that we're all clear in terms of which service areas will be subject to that review in the first instance. So happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks, Justin. What I'd like to do is let's focus on the first piece around in-source, outsource, co-source model. From the committee on that. My personal view is I don't think we then need to get council to approve that. To me, the council should approve the final proposition. I think it's up to us to say what's the right model. Management go away and form that up to bring back a recommendation to council on that.
Yeah. If I may just respond to that, the way that this recommendation is framed, and given the importance of the internal audit and service review program, the recommendation has been framed such that it will be a recommendation by the audit committee to council regarding the third approach. So that's why it's drafted that way, as opposed to getting feedback now in the administration and taking a report to council to adopt that approach.
Yeah, it would still come back through our committee, that first step. I'm not saying value of that line is, if we agree that's the model, management go away and form it up, bring it back to this committee, and we go forward from there. So Peter, I'm going to go to you first in relation to looking at the first piece around the model going forward for internal audit and service review delivery.
Thanks, Grant. I certainly support that particular model. I think in terms of having that outsourced model helps us manage costs, like it's been kind of stated. There's that arm's length independence, and certainly we point the expertise we might have internally.
Thanks, Peter. Laurie?
I would strongly support an outsourced model in the first instance, and the reason for that is very much around the independence. I'm not sure we're going to get best value for spend, because it will be more expensive being outsourced, but we will get perhaps a fresh perspective. So for that reason, I would say in the first instance, look at that. The only qualifier I have is again being very clear on the scope of work that we do outsource to those providers, because you can chew up your whole budget fee very, very quickly if you don't get tight on scope of work. So that's where I make sure we've got the focus, but I'm in favour of the outsourcing.
Thanks, Laurie. Pat?
I think for the reasons that Ori said, outsourcing is probably preferable, but sometimes my preference is co-sourcing model for a number of reasons, which includes a transfer of knowledge and also because of the knowledge of the internal staff in relation to some things, because with outsourcing model, they spend their time asking staff and then repeating their responses while the staff are told. But I also think that it's shown as an advantage to provide cost savings, but critically important that the scope of work is very well defined, because it can be a significant disadvantage. And although what we've seen is the scope for the 5 service reviews separately, sure we've seen what plan, is there a plan for anything separately from an internal audit perspective, or is it just the service reviews?
Yeah, Justin, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, no, there will be a scope of work for the internal audit function separate to the service reviews, and whether one be likely to be 2 different service providers. That's an assumption, but we would go out to market for 2 pieces of work: internal audit and service review, separate scopes of work.
Are there providers out there who do service review programs?
Yes, there is. Yeah, we're aware of a number of companies that do have experience, particularly in local government, doing service reviews. So we'll obviously make sure we approach those companies to ensure that we've got their response.
So you've got 50,000, potentially 65,000, the internal audit and the service review.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, noting that there will obviously be a potential crossover between the 2 functions. The service review, because both ultimately are there to achieve the same outcome, which is to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the management and governance of the organisation. The service review obviously are very targeted, looking at specific reviews and how to ensure that we're using the most cost-effective and efficient means to deliver services, that we've got the right service levels, etc. So that's a really targeted and focused piece of work, in this instance around 5 key services, where the internal audit function, again subject to that scope of work, will either be more generic or will be targeted on something other than the service reviews. So we've got a provisional sum. We'll obviously know once we've been out to tender and having come back through the audit committee with the scope of works. We'll all be on the same page in terms of what we're asking respondents to cost up, and then once we get the responses that comes in double that, the audit committee / the administration will say, well, our budget is X and it's going to cost us Y, so how do we either change the scope or extend the budget? Combination of both.
Yes, sorry.
Just a query, is there scope within any of those service reviews to actually do them with other councils to share resource costs to benchmarking as well, or yes, ourselves?
Actually, a really good question through the chair. Ideally, if we could partner with another council or councils to do the service reviews, there could be some cost efficiencies for doing that. The challenge, I will just caution in advance, is that trying to do apples to apples comparisons between two councils sounds easy, but in practice, be quite challenging. I'd certainly be open to the opportunity, and I think there are some councils that may be happy to partner and to do that benchmarking. So if we can identify those other councils, that would be certainly an approach. But I'm not sure if it will deliver significant budget savings, because either way, whoever's doing the service will still need to do the deep dive into both those organisations, understand service levels, and the means by which the councils deliver the service, which sometimes can be nuanced depending on your locality and the
From my perspective, I'm a bit like Pat on this. I normally like to see internal organisation owners for these type of activities. Normally you see a risk division would be a key component of that, because a lot of these reviews around health check business as well, we don't have that. So Justin, the question to you, who's going to be the organisation owner for service review programs? Who's going to be the organisation owner for internal audit? So we've got those two structures in place. Where's the plug into the business on those?
Both of them would sit with the manager at governance, which then reports through to the director of corporate services.
Yeah. So the key for me is that how we take the learnings coming out of each of these reviews and permeate that through the organisation. So that's something I'll leave with the management on that. We've got the request for tender, and then we've got the identified areas. I'll probably lead this one off first. My preference would be, we've said we want to now go outsourced, is for management to go away and say, well, who would be the appropriate providers, and go and talk to those providers around what they could do for us and where they think priority and focus should be as well. Because sometimes you actually get a lead into where their thinking is around a certain risk perspective or a service delivery that may be appropriate to review. Because if we set up front what we want done, there may be something else they say, well, have you considered? So to me, I wouldn't want to be locking in, here's our first 3 reviews, go away and fund it up, figure out who's the relationship with, what is it, and therefore what's then the process of that engagement going forward. So I just put that on the table to start with for discussion with other committee members. So I won't ask for your response at this stage, Justin, on that, because I know you have a view, but it's more around the next steps from a committee point of view, because we've got all the bits here. We've agreed the principle at top around, well, look, here's the governance structure you want going forward and the model. It's now around the execution of how we then firm that up. So, Laurie, I might go to you first on that one.
Yeah, my experience in that area is that there probably is a number of organisations that are specialised in service reviews for local government, whether they do regional or metro. It's probably the key question. So I think we have issues in terms of getting the right organisation. For me, it's as much the question of how much is internal controls-based testing, review, validation versus performance optimisation balance that we want to get out of those two. And if they are separate organisations, that's really the balance that you need to achieve. So, yeah, you'll want to be keen to just make sure that there's that balance and it's been well thought through, that it's not just all one or understand. And then coming back to the other question, given our limited resources, making sure that they're really focused on what are the key risks and opportunities that we want to be targeting.
I certainly agree with the comments that you made by Laurie yourself, Grant. I don't have any further to add.
The proposal for the requested for proposal, are you proposing a limited selection? Are you proposing patient? Because you just have to be a bit careful then, depending on how you approach people, depending on what your procurement is.
Yeah, for these types of services, they are, I'll say, they're relatively common across local government. So my view is that it would be an open call. However, we would make sure that a couple of key service providers are aware that we've made that call. So not breaching our procurement processes, but just making sure that a couple of the key organisations are aware of the fact that those are on the market and we need to engage. Again, my personal view, probably a couple of firms, but it may be that one firm potentially is interested in doing both.
Thanks, Justin. Pat, did you have anything further?
I mean, I think just in terms of process, supporting in this instance the outsourcing model. Seen what that model yet might look like for the internal audit. And looking at this scope of work, I don't think you're coming the dollar figure that you're talking about. And some of this scope of work could easily be reduced, given what I understand the aim to be. For example, you really don't need a tree review for the last 5 years. You just need to know what the compliance requirements are currently. But I'm assuming, I'm just asking what it is that the next step is. Is it that it will come back to us before it goes out? Or is it that you'll then deal with it and then come back to us with here's 2 or 3 proposals that are being looked at? The other thing is,
Can we do it? Can we do that one first?
Sorry.
Yeah. As per the report, the intention would be to bring back the request for tender, so the audit committee can actually see what it is that we're going to ask the market or effective respondents to actually tender on. So that will help, with that discussion about shaping what the scope of the respective pieces of work are. So that we would be looking to bring that back to the next meeting of the audit committee.
sorry, I was confused because I had the request for proposal.
My question is back to the committee is, do we need to see that, or we've agreed this is the path forward? Management, you now go out and talk up to providers you want to talk to and come back with a recommendation of this is the provider to do these activities for us and here's the scope of the budget. I don't know the value we're adding to the steps other than we've agreed the model, go away and talk it up and bring it back for us to look at. Laurie, I would probably go to you first on that.
Probably would agree with you on that. The only thing I'd say is, given that it's our first collective program as a group, not a bad idea to have a bit of oversight over how those resources are being allocated at that particular point in time. But so longer term, I'd say no. Maybe in the short term, yeah, it makes some sense.
It makes sense what you said.
Sorry, so this request for proposal that we've got, is that what the proposal is that you are going out to market on?
So the steps of the process at this point in time would be to come back to the next meeting of this audit committee with the request for tender documents for both internal audit and service reviews. We've in advance prepared a draft request for proposals in relation to service reviews because we wanted to provide the audit committee with some understanding in terms of what the potential piece of work is that we believe we need to do. The third item on tonight's, that's a Freudian slip from other councils. The third item on today's agenda is what you would potentially like us to feed into the development of that request for tender that we will bring back to the next meeting, which in part goes to the chair's question around should the audit committee have a role or not to play in terms of defining which service areas should be included so that we can draft that up, or leave that to come back to the next audit committee on the basis that we've identified those 5 areas in the first instance. And as stated in the obvious, we haven't yet put together the scope for the internal audit function and showed how those two potentially could be done by the one service provider or mutually exclusive, depending on what responses we ultimately receive from the market. Also noting, if I can just go one step further, it may be that some companies may have some particular expertise around some of those service areas and potentially not others. So it may well be the case that a respondent says they're happy to do 3 out of 5 and it's going to cost this much, but for whatever reason they don't want to do the whole lot. Or there could be some economies of scale doing all 5 in one hit, as opposed to potentially 5 separate pieces of review. But again, that's what the request for tender will solicit from the respondents, how best can they deliver that program of work in order to do some of those potential efficiencies if they do get bundled up.
Can I just note then, our terms of reference says specifically that we are to review and monitor the program and scope service reviews. So to some degree, that means that we should be looking at the scope of the service review. And again, like Laurie said, perhaps in initial stage, perhaps we should see what the scope is that is going to go out.
You can do that 2 ways. You can have input to start with or approval at the end. So
I agree with that.
yeah, I'm not against us in this first instance seeing the tender document, but I think going forward we've got to be directive. Management go away and go what they need to do, rather than we step in the process each time. And are we adding value to management going forward? So from my perspective is, I'd like us to go out and find a partner who can do service delivery general rather than picking bits and pieces. Else you're always picking off, well, who do we go to and adds process. And same with internal audit. I think we need to consider as well when we put the budget up is internal audit services, you're looking at a 50 grand investment plus in internal audit. And these service reviews, you're probably looking at 100 grand. So, it's probably around a 150 feel of what we've got sitting in there to get value out of that. Because the internal audit to me is more than just assurance over transactions. It's more health checks, it's risk reviews, it's identifying at a high level rather than just the tick and flick of the old internal audit side as well. So I think once you go and speak to some of those firms about, okay, what's contemporary internal audit, you may have a different view of what's in scope and out of scope. So that's why, to me, is you don't firm some of that, you start the discussion and they inform what would come back to the committee as well. So my view on this one is we agree that we're going to go outsourced. We now say management go away and form up to 10 documents for us, bring that back at next meeting and identify who the key suppliers you may want to go out and talk to and why, and let's narrow that down. So, and then we want to look at putting exclusive arrangements in place. Are we comfortable with that?
I was comfortable up to probably the last sentence.
Yeah.
I'd need to go back and review council's procurement policy, but I think we would, at this point in time, probably stop short of coming back to the audit committee at the next meeting saying we should do a select tender or select approach to only these 3, 4, 5 companies.
Well, maybe these are in, then maybe poor choice of words, but at least it's a broad one, but these people are included in the review. So not limited, but inclusive.
Yeah. So I think we're saying the same thing. So yes, we'll, in order to comply with our procurement policy, it's likely that we'd put out a broad call, but we would make sure that certain companies are aware that that call is being made. And in terms of informing the report that comes back to the audit committee, we will certainly talk to some of those companies and other councils that have already done these sorts of reviews and draw on our own experience. So a number of staff have been in councils that have had service reviews done in the past, so we'll certainly bring that intelligence into the report and scope for the audit committee's consideration at the next meeting.
Okay, so at this stage, we are now the need to recommend to council. I'm not saying the need to recommend to council. Mine is we'll bring the proposition to council when we're at that point with our work scope, saying yes, we agree with this model. Go away and form it up for us to take something firm back to council on this is the model. Are you comfortable, Justin, on that?
Yeah, I think if we can just change the wording of item number 1 to take it away from recommending to council at this point in time, I think maybe if we put that the audit committee supports the establishment of an internal audit and service review to be delivered for an outsourced model. The reason for that is that the council is now in the middle of what is going to be a very challenging budget deliberation. Audit committee is aware that our financial situation at present is that we're unsustainable. So there's a very acute focus on the question, do we need to continue to deliver the services that we're delivering at present, maintain the service levels that we're currently offering, and are we delivering those services in the most efficient way? And in some instances, council is probably seeking an increase in service levels. So I think it's important that the audit committee consideration of this matter is reported back to council, and that revised motion will achieve that result so that the council is aware that this program is coming. We have informed the council that the program's coming, so happy with that. Happy to word it accordingly.
And the second one will be, and the committee notes that a tender document for the provision of outsourced services will be formulated, provided to the next audit risk committee meeting.
That's correct.
Full stop.
Yeah, we'll just get the, so change number 2 to note. So number 2 starts with note, or notes that the delete request.
Notes that let's put notes that a tender document.
Yeah.
Tender document.
Sorry, I don't want to be pedantic, but a tender is slightly different from a request for proposal from a procurement perspective. So,
Okay, what words would you like? I think it's changeable.
what are you going to do? You're going to put it out to tender, or are you requesting?
Doesn't the value doesn't necessarily mean we have to do a request. Right.
That's what I thought.
Request for proposal based on the threshold.
Tenders tend to be
That's what you want, a request for
more
proposal.
formalised and
Yeah.
with more requirements around them.
So request for, you happy with that, Justin? Mm-hmm. So notice that a request for proposal for the 2 outsourced services will be formulated by management and presented to the next audit and risk committee. Consideration, full stop. The rest is deleted. Okay. Yep, 3 goes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Through the chair. You did ask the question before about what role, if any, the audit committee should play in determining which services should be subject to review, which leads us into that 3rd item. Did you want to discuss that further?
Yeah, well, let's have a discussion. Mine on that one is management would normally work that up and bring, you guys know, we don't have assurance maps, we don't have risk maps in front of us, or the overall understanding of the service provision to say these are the key ones to look at, other than we do know that if there is a revenue centre that is not performing at the moment, we want that reviewed. We talked about childcare before. So we're going to be very much guided by, without having that information on where management sees that, because you'll come back with the justification of why. But how about we just open it up for a general discussion from now on, your identified areas, if that helps you, then when you go and talk to those external parties around where focus and priority will be made. Comfortable with that? Justin?
Yep.
No, don't need to go into conflict.
Yes, so need to go into comment for that discussion.
There's a recommendation in the report we can use if we want to.
Okay, so we'll go into confidence to have a mover. Thanks, Peter. Second to Laurie. We'll now go into confidence session. Thanks, Justin. All right, so item 3 is deleted. So we now move into the draft annual business plan.
Sorry, you just now need to get the mover and a seconder for those two.
We did that before.
When you got a mover and seconder go into confidence, we haven't got a mover and seconder of those two recommendations as reworded.
Okay, all right, we'll go back. A mover, thanks Laurie, seconder, thanks Pat. All those in favour? Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right, we'll go into the annual business plan. Right, I think listen to your outline.
Thank you, through the chair. So obviously there's a lot of information presented in this report, so I'm happy to sort of provide a brief overview, but then obviously happy to have some depth discussions on what is provided here. So what has been provided is the content for the annual business plan. We're currently starting the process of working through the actually generating the final document. As can be seen on council's website, it will be very similar to last year's annual business plan budget as a document. So what we have presented here, obviously we discussed the background and the process we've been through internally to sort of prioritise and ensure that what's included in that business plan aligns with council's strategies and priorities moving forward. What we've also provided in here is some sensitivity analysis of that audit committee meeting. There was some discussion around wanting to be able to see that. So we've already gone through some rating scenarios with council. That's often a big discussion point. So we will discuss those at sort of length with council. And in fact, that the elected members have signified that what we want to see is off the side. So we'll have our draft and business plan with a proposition of an 8.5% rate increase at this time, but that there will be additional materials around the other rating options and some of those impacts. And in this report, we've discussed the fact that we've probably got a little bit of room to move in terms of the rate increase between that, maybe that 7.6 and the 8.5, but that we wouldn't be recommending that anything lower than 7.6 be adopted without some other adjustments to the long-term financial plan to offset that. Some of the other sensitivity analysis around CPI is just showing, obviously that's a key assumption that sits within our budget, and as we use March CPI and it's not yet released, showing what the impacts of that are on a potential rate increase that might be required come adoption time. And what that shows is that because we got our assumption that we've got in there around wage increases, probably be sort of a fixed assumption that the rate increase doesn't move 1 for 1 with CPI for this year. So if we assume CPI 7.5, if it was to come down 1%, we probably could only reduce the rate increase by around half of that, about 0.5%. That's the sort of what the sensitivity analysis has shown. It's based on that wage assumption that's in there. And then the other lot of sensitivity analysis starting to, so there's been a lot of discussion around lots of things happening in the background around the city and some potential upside risk to our plan that we've not built in. And I think we're being quite prudent in not building in that information into our adopted plan and the one we're using for decision making at this point in time. But I think it's still important to start having those discussions around some of the potential that is coming and what part of the discussion's been over the last sort of 12 months or so around. We know that there are some of these upside risks. We're sort of trying to be ready as a city and have the resources to be ready for these things. We know that that extra income is not flowing through our plan yet, but there is the potential for it to happen. So we've just done a bit of scenario analysis on the things we sort of know about that are already being discussed, that are in the works in the background. But as discussed in the report and in the itself, is that we think that it is still prudent to only build those things in one case, especially from the business, from commercial trades, so things that are happening in the state, that sort of thing. It's only prudent to build that at that time. And again, from a residential rates growth, we haven't had residential rates growth for probably around 10 years. We think it's still prudent to not start building those in until we start to see some. So sort of said if we, were to experience about 1% growth over a 2-year period, that might be when we reassess that assumption and start to potentially build in a small amount of residential growth. So they're some of the key sort of items that we've put in here for consideration and discussion. Obviously, there is a lot of content as well. So
Thanks for that, Grant. I'm sure we're going to bring you in and out of this discussion. I want to treat this one as fairly free flowing. Laurie, I might go to you first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of questions. Just for starters, there's a lot of talk around sensitivity around revenue and rates, income, etc. Does that mean that there is no room to move on the actual program of work and the amount that we've got in terms of capital spend? When we sort of have a look at it, it appears to me like this year's a bit of an anomaly in terms of the additional amount of spend. Is that can you just talk through for starters the thinking around that, how we got to that position?
Yeah. Discuss that. So, the first probably across the government, I would say, we're not alone in terms of capital carry forward. So, what tends to happen is things get approved, and as we're working through them, they might end up spreading over a couple of years. So, they might have been approved a number of years ago, and then we're working through probably the planning. So I think one thing that the government as a whole needs to get rid of, but that we're getting a bit better at as we go along, is actually trying to plan out so that we've done the planning work the year before we budget for the capital item. Maybe we didn't do that so well in the past. So with our capital spend, it looks fairly high, I think, because some of it is already the amounts that we've, previous budget review, we've sort of rolled forward. Capital spend.
Does that mean that our operating result in previous years is higher than what otherwise should have been because we spend the money?
Well, that's only going to affect our interest expense from an operating point of view. So these are capital items, so they don't impact our bottom line. The only thing that's going to affect on our bottom line is interest and maybe roles and depreciation.
These projects that have been previously approved, but the work wasn't done.
Yes. And
we're just continuing to push it forward.
Yeah, but we do, but not on a wholehearted basis. So, we do report very commonly, very regularly to council on our major projects. So monthly on our really big ones and quarterly on ones sort of between $100,000 and $1 million, and update those sort of schedule of spend over time. And then during budget reviews, we'll identify where items are going to spread across multiple years. So often we don't know, for instance, a time frame until we go out to tender on projects. And what we've been finding is even the process from going out for tender to awarding the contract has become longer for us because there's so much negotiation around scope, just because of the way prices are at the moment. So we're constantly reviewing that and updating our sort of forward schedules for spend. And that might mean that amounts get rolled forward, but they are capital amounts. So we only roll forward or carry forward operating amounts, budgets in very sort of extenuating circumstances where it's a very specific project with a council resolution, those sorts of things. What we're rolling forward are capital items, which don't affect our actual operating result in any given year, other than interest.
So with that capital spend, you've got X millions of dollars next year. Do we know what that is adding to OPEX from the point of view of depreciation and financing costs? Have we quantified that amount? Because I think that's where Laurie's coming from, is what is this adding to the business itself going forward? Because we're in an unsustainable position, and are we just adding another component to that unsustainable position?
Yeah, it's just on that, further to that is, given there obviously has been rates movement, are you getting a different rate from financing? What's the impact of that? And then secondly, if the cost of services have gone up, are we actually getting less service for what it is they're actually trying to do? And I'm trying to understand, A, what's the cost impact, and B, what are the tools we've got to not put ourselves in this position that's outside of what our parameters are. And then when you sort of look at it, taking one step back, you've got all-time high CPI rates going up, and then you've got a big whack of increased spend over and above what previous years are. Normally you'd sit there and go, if things are going up extra, you'd maybe want to tone down some of the other activity. I'm just trying to understand how you come to that balance. So first, what is the actual impact in terms of extra cost and extra interest we're paying? And then secondly, why are we using this point in time to actually have that additional spend when we know we're at, outside our parameters from a deficit perspective?
Sorry, I can frame my response here differently now. Sorry, apologies. So one, I would say is all the ongoing costs related to any capital spend that's in the plan is built into the plan. So any interest and depreciation is built in those forward projections.
Yeah, the question is how much is it, I think, Grant? So we know you've got it in there.
Yeah.
So what is the quantum? That's what we're trying to get a feel for. What is this adding to the base?
Yeah, so and I'll come back to it. So I would say that the new spend of capital that we're approving in this budget for renewal and for new upgrade is actually lower than we've probably approved in previous years. There's some bit within the budget that is carry forward, and I've tried to clearly identify that in the document itself. So there's a thing on new upgrade projects that are being approved for the first time, renewal projects that are being approved for the first time, and then there's an item called continuing projects, which is actually items that have been approved in a previous year, but that the spend has just been rolled forward into this year based on updated projections. So I would say I don't believe that we are approving new capital expenditure that's above and beyond normal. Would be in line or fairly in line with normal. And in fact, for new upgrade, we've actually suggested that we don't fully allocate our normal allocation of spend for this year, and we actually roll some of that allocation forward to give ourselves time to catch up on previously approved projects and give ourselves some capacity for some of the big items that we know are coming. So I hope that sort of answers the question. I would say our capital spend is probably no different than in previous years.
Yeah. So the question's still there. We'd like to know the quantification of what's then in the expense line of depreciation and borrowing costs associated with the capital program works next year. I know you don't do that off the top of your head, but
Can I,
we're just trying to get a feel for, is it 500,000?
yeah, can I respond to it in a different way?
Sure.
That's when we're spending money to renew existing assets, there is no additional increase bottom line in terms of our operating, because the depreciation is being funded to replace the assets, and that's ongoing. So it's a like-for-like replacement, so there's no increase in cost associated with depreciation or financing. You'll only get an increase in cost if you're actually extending the life or you're putting on new assets. And if I can ask a different question, in the total capital spend, how much is renewal and how much is new? Because it's the new assets or upgraded assets which will add to the bottom line.
Yeah, so new capital projects that we approved for the first time this year is about the one.
So we're saying that all these assets we're renewing are at end of life and there's no depreciation cost at the moment, or that's what I'm a bit confused the way you just said
The
that.
depreciation will just roll along, so they are being depreciated. They should be at current cost because we revalue our assets every year. Well, we do a proper revalue every 5 years, but then we index them annually. So when we renew an existing asset, the quantum change in depreciation should be negligible.
So if I could just
So you just revalue them and then start again.
We revalue every 3 or 5 years.
Every 5 years in detail, every asset. Yeah.
So for an existing asset that we're renewing, the actual renewal itself is not adding to the underlying costs, which is primarily depreciation. There is a little bit of financing, but it's primarily depreciation. It's a like-for-like replacement. So if you've got long-lasting assets that typically last for potentially 80 years, and every year, in this case, we're replacing $4 or $5 million of existing assets. You take $4 or $5 million off and add $4 or $5 million back on. So the actual depreciation figure won't change materially. And similarly, the financing cost is again negligible. It's only when you're increasing the asset base where you're actually increasing that bottom line cost to council. And what Grant's just substantiated is that there's only about $1.3 million of new assets being created. Again, if you work on the assumption, just for the simplicity of calculations, if they're long-lasting assets, it would be under $100,000 increase in depreciation.
Can I just ask to clarify on that? I've got an asset sustainability ratio of 126%.
Question button, sorry, Laurie.
Sorry, I've got an asset sustainability ratio of 126%. Then I'm spending at more than a 1-to-1 run rate. I'm overspending compared to my depreciation.
Yeah.
So therefore my costs, etc., are going up. Whereas last year we're at substantially under 100%.
Yeah.
And my question is, again, if we're in an environment where we are substantially high from the CPI perspective and cost increase, why would we be using this point in time to go 25% plus over and above?
Yeah. And the answer to that question is that essentially it's a timing issue. The reason why we're 126% is because we've got $2 odd million worth of work that was already budgeted, already scheduled to be done in the current financial year that wasn't done. So it's carried forward. So we've already collected the rates income. We've already brought to account that we're doing that work. But from a timing point of view, that work is now going to be delivered next financial year, which then shows that we're spending more in next financial year than our depreciation in that given year. So it's purely a timing issue. I'll get Grant to just add a little bit more clarity around that one.
Yeah, so it's actually it's not measured against depreciation anymore, it's measured against the figures in the asset management plans. But I agree, it's a very hard one to measure. What we basically aim to do is to, in our long-term financial plan, we fully fund our asset management plans. So our budget, long-term budget for that ratio is 100%. The complication is we always have timing differences. And so you always find that our actual tends to be a bit lower. And then you roll some forward and then your budgeted figure for that year is above 100%. I believe that what we're doing is we're budgeting over the long-term financial plan to fully renew our assets as they fall due. There will always be timing issues with that ratio and measuring it in the year, because we do have carry forwards, like Justin said, into that figure for things that probably should have been officially done this year as our management plan, but won't be because of the project, the timelines.
So in an ideal world, if we were delivering the work in the year that we should be delivering, we would be back closer to that 100%. But at the start of the year, in this case, we're budgeting or forecasting that we're going to spend more in the coming year because we've got this carryover. At the end of the year, all things being equal, we'll probably then not deliver on that full capital works program. So in terms of actuals at the end of the year, we'll be under. So unfortunately, it's a timing issue. I think more so, not so much to the point of are we adding extra cost to the bottom line in terms of the operating. You could ask the question, do we need to keep rates high if we're not able to demonstrate that we're going to be able to deliver those projects in the current financial year? So you could have potentially a one-off year where you actually reduce your call on rate payers because you've already made that call on the rate payer the year before to fund that cost. But in doing that, you've then got 1 year where you're not funding your depreciation, and that basically creates this asset or infrastructure backlog. So at some stage, you're going to have to catch up on that. So purely from a cash point of view and from rates, you could present an argument that maybe we should reduce our rates in the current year because we're not going to be able to deliver the whole capital works program. But if you look at rates, funding your depreciation, which in turn is renewing your existing asset base, you need to do that. Otherwise, you create a deficit that will have to be caught up at some stage.
Just continue with that, just to clarify, I think page 93 also have a line of depreciation at 21%. Let's talk through that. given that a lot of the assets that we would have, I would assume would have a 10-year life or building roads and underground. So just sort of talk us through that magnitude.
Yeah. That's actually a bit below for local government, so we're below the average for depreciation, but that's because of the nature of some of the services we provide. So most local government will see depreciation being about 25% of their total costs. Because we run the childcare, which actually has quite a large operating cost, but has not a very asset intensive part of our business, that actually brings for us our depreciation down compared to average local government standards. But yeah, I mean, that is one line that is basically made up of, multitudes of information. So we fully condition rate and value all of our major asset classes once every 5 years. So our big one, so we've got transport, which is roads, curbs and footpaths, we've got buildings, what we call open space assets or structures, and then stormwater and irrigation. So there are 5 sort of main asset classes, the ones we don't worry about kind of valuation. So that happens every 5 years for each of those asset classes, but we also do a desktop valuation indexation of all assets each year. And those, when we do those processes, that's fully testing all the assumptions around useful lives and remaining life of those assets. So we're pretty confident that we've got our depreciation figure to a fairly mature level, especially over the last sort of the last cycle of all those revals. We've fully componentized now our buildings. So I think we're fairly confident that our depreciation figure in our overall budget is pretty close to, there's lots of assumptions underway, but it's pretty accurate.
A lot of you looking at it, that was thinking it was a 25% amortisation rate being applied. Is that?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarity on what that was. Yeah. And then I guess my other question really is we are at a deficit, right? And for me, someone who's really uncomfortable with the level of deficit and the level of spend in terms of what we're doing. So really trying to understand what tools we've got and what things we're doing to prioritise activities that may minimise that deficit and make sure we're as close as possible within that premise. I think you touched on one just then when you started the discussion around depreciation. There's something that's obviously creating a bit of an anomaly and really understanding how much emphasis has been put on those activities that are creating the deficit and things that we might be able to address that, because personally it doesn't sit that comfortably to be walking in cold and going, but there's a position that's well outside of parameters and not really focusing our efforts on how to keep it within those parameters.
Yeah, so if you stay on that page 93, that's showing at a very high level the allocation of our cost and revenue in terms of our operating result. Councils have got two broad levers in order to get back to a surplus balanced position. We need to increase our revenue, which, if you look at our list, means we need to increase general rates, fees and charges, statutory charges, or grant income. The only one that's material and the one that council has got direct control on is council rates. Or the other lever is to try and reduce expenditure. If we look at those categories of expenditure, we either need to reduce our employee costs. So all things being equal, we either need to reduce the number or how much we're paying staff. Noting that if you look at the services that we provide, a lot of them are labour intensive. So library is one, childcare is another. You need staff to deliver those services. So if you're looking at reducing staff numbers very quickly, not straight away, but very quickly, then you need to start looking at service levels and services, which, going back to the last item on the agenda, is what we flagged that we want to do. Because if we're going to make a substantive inroad into our labour or employee costs, we're going to have to look at reducing service levels or services. Materials and contractors, next big one. goods and services, and then depreciation, which is to your point when you asked, that is reflective of the asset base we've got. Things like road and transport, you might say are probably fixed in need roads. What's maybe less fixed is buildings. We have a significant stock holding of buildings that we are responsible for as a council in the city. Many of those buildings are at or close to end of life. And over the last couple of years, the council's been looking at how do we potentially move towards more multi-user mixed purpose facilities instead of what we've got at present, which is very much exclusive rights use with a whole heap of different individual stakeholders in each building, typically not able to pay their own way. And we've got a double-edged sword that it's not only council-owned buildings on council land that we have in the city, we also have a significant number of non-council-owned buildings, so owned typically by community groups and the like, on council or state-owned land. So it's a double-edged problem for us that we've got a lot of buildings in our city that are at end of life. Community groups don't have the capacity to raise income to renew their buildings or contribute to council renewing the buildings that we're responsible for, and council's got limited capacity to pay for the renewal and upgrade of those buildings. So things like the pods were strategically put in place to give us some flexibility to try and get some users out of some of the existing buildings so that we can rationalise some of the buildings that we have going forward, which would then enable us to, again, all things being equal, to reduce that depreciation expense because we're no longer looking at or needing to renew and upgrade those buildings. But it's going to take some time to get some of those community groups out of their existing buildings into alternative buildings.
Thanks, Justin. It's a good explanation. Yeah, for me, it's really just that concept that if we are knowingly running at a deficit that sits outside of our parameters, those alternative actions should be prioritised as what are we doing to get within those parameters, because otherwise in the absence of that's like, well, it is what it is, and bad luck. And so if it is a question of the level of services or the type of programs or sourcing new sources of revenue, whether it be through grants or other activities, to me that becomes even higher priority when we're in this situation than if it's a normal year business as usual. And when you've got all of the things going in the wrong direction, i.e. costs going up high, level of activity going above our level, no really new high grants income that we're sort of aware of, to me it pushes much more focus on the need to be as vigilant as we can and look at whatever we can do to address those other areas, because for me it's just a lack of comfort with the position where we're at. I guess that's probably part of our role, is to challenge that and make sure that those questions are actually
and this is an ongoing source of uncomfort for using that term. The elected member group, the management of the organisation, probably the community at large, but probably to a lesser extent, because they don't necessarily fully understand it, are all uncomfortable with our current situation. The reason, in part, we're looking at service reviews is to go to that very point to say, if someone come out tomorrow and burst the hydrogen bubble, and all of a sudden, all of the planned investment that we anticipate will occur in our city over the coming years just vaporises overnight. Back to those two key levers, we would very much be looking at having to reduce our services and service levels. The discussion we had with the council leading into last financial year, so this time last year, and with the committee at that time, was the question, is now the right time to be looking at making cuts or reducing services and service levels at a time where we're trying to get more skilled workforce, more people coming to live within our city and generally improve the amenity, and to address some of the legacy issues that we've got around some of our assets? Is now the time for council to pull that lever and look to live within our means? The the view that the council formed, and certainly the community, when those people in the community that engaged with us through the consultation regarding our new business plan, on balance, came to the point that now wasn't the right time, sort of 12 months ago. Fast forward to now, we're about to have that same conversation. Is now the right time to start looking to make cuts and reductions? Looking at one lever. The other lever is where, how far off is there before we will see some increased income to help address that gap we've got. At this point in time, we're very, very confident that additional income is coming. As Grant's indicated, we're being conservative that we haven't factored that into our long-term financial plan at this point in time because of the uncertainty, but we'll keep testing those assumptions, and I think it's only a matter of time now before some of that income will start to come online. And ultimately, it's a question: do we start, moving parts now, or do we continue to hold our breath in an informed manner? We're not doing that just to bury our head in the sand. I can do the whole tap dance in terms of what we expect is going to happen in our city in coming years, and each of you sat in on a recent briefing by the state government. As of tomorrow, there's going to be another major announcement with our major employer in town, which will also signify their confidence in terms of our future. So, it is really uncomfortable, particularly as a qualified and professional accountant, for me to sit here and suggest that we should not make any significant changes at this point in time. But ultimately, that will be for the audit committee's consideration and ultimately council, whether it's now time to make some of those reductions or cuts.
Yeah, the key for me in this discussion we're having, we're not questioning what you guys are doing or the endeavour. This is more just an understanding and point of view, as well as a challenge side of it. So yeah, we're not questioning any of the intellectual capital has been put into this, what you're trying to do. This is more around flushing out. This is where we're seeing discomfort from our perspective. And what are you doing? So this is not personal.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can respond to that, I'm not responding.
No, I'm not saying you are.
Yeah. Personally, we are equally concerned about our financial situation. If we could make changes now to improve the situation, we would be. We believe the service reviews are a vehicle where we could get some cost efficiencies, but it needs to be an informed decision. I could sit here right now and say to you, I believe I could make some savings in the organisation, but it will mean a change in service levels, and I don't have anything to lean back on in terms of community's expectations, community satisfaction, and something I can put in front of council to provide the rationale or support for some changes, because they will be significant decisions in terms of some of the services, in terms of how those services are provided by council or actually no longer provided by council.
That's great.
And one thing I think, hopefully, so one thing we've added, if you look at page 68 and 69 of the agenda, I think one of the things we've added into that business plan as a separate item this year is CEO's report on financial sustainability. So it's not something that previously, so last year we adopted it separately as a separate report at the end of financial year, but we're now adding it into this document, something that was sort of been implicitly listed in the Government Act, but now I suppose as part of our supposed reviews, it's something they want to see. And so I think we've got this information in here, and I think that's sort of framing that question you're asking. I'm sort of framing like, we've put in there that we know if in a 2 to 3 year time frame nothing changes and none of these things come to light, there's going to be some significant decisions that have to be made around our financial position. As Justin said, we've had discussions around whether this is the right time. I think we're getting to the point where we are fairly confident that some of those income streams are coming online. But as I said, we've been quite prudent in terms of not actually including them in the model for decision making at this time. And I think part of that is so that we keep having this discussion.
I don't think the committee uncomfortable with that proposition. So
Yeah, it's not, I think it's,
conservative position you've taken, I think we agree that's an appropriate position to take.
yeah, and allows us to keep having these conversations so that we are, because I think if you sort of put that into the model and say, oh, we've got income coming, it's going to disguise some of those hard things that we're actually going through as a council. So I think it's like, part of not including that is being prudent and so that we're always having this conversation for the next period of time until hopefully it's not a conversation we have to have as much anymore. Or we have to have those other really hard conversations around it isn't coming, it hasn't happened, what are we doing next? And in the meantime, that we are doing other, we're not doing nothing, but we're looking at service reviews and those sorts of things. So, yeah.
I was just wondering whether there's a way to try to provide a bit more clarity on what that may look like, what it may be. So I think about the mining, for example, they talk about their reserves that are proved or possible, probable. So you get an idea of what is potentially in the pipeline. And from this organisation, is there a way for us to say we're spending and speculating on all this type of investments and overspend here because we believe there is a potential upside of between X and Y in the future, and the likelihood of that is 1% or 2% or 20% or 100%, so that at least there's some sort of guideline as to why we're doing it and what the size of the prize potentially is, or is that too hard?
No, we can do that, and Grant for the first time has started to show some of those models and the assumptions and the sensitivity. Now that we've started, we'll continue to do that and we'll continue to mature those assumptions. So short answer is I think we can do more of that and probably share more with the Audit Committee Council and ultimately the community about our level of confidence that some of those things will come online. So
I think that is critical because that gives the upside of this. Else we are kicking the can down the road a little bit with this, and we need to know, well, as Laurie said, here's the various scenarios of if this comes on stream, this is what the plan, and here's the range we're talking about as well. Because we're making decisions saying we think it's going to be all right, but we still don't, it's still ether around what it is. Yeah. Yes, Grant?
Yeah, so if you want to go to page 106 of the agenda, so that's where, and it is still in its sort of basic form, but happy to start fleshing this out more over time. So the sensitivity analysis around new rates income is there. So model, what's called model 5 in there. Everything that we've included as potential income in that model are things that are in the works. They're not all, there are varying degrees of probability around those. I think one of the two big ones in there that are getting to very close to the point of being definite are rating the land basically at Port Meniphan for one part of the hydrogen project, and then the land just north of the city for the other part of the hydrogen. So they're both parts of POIs for the state government. One of them is actually at the point where there's been some deals signed. So I think those two are getting very close, but obviously we don't know the full value and that. But we've estimated those rates based on we've already done in terms of searches coming in on those properties that will be potentially rateable soon. Fortunately, motel is obviously a little more up in the air, but definitely well progressed in terms of being a possible thing. And the other one being some level of residential development. I think I only built in 300 houses in the year or something. So not a huge amount. We know that we probably need a few thousand. So I think, and there are other things in there that we haven't considered. Whether there's any rateability around potentially desalination plant or the offsets of that, or the offsite bits of that, and other items that are in there. So I think that middle model there, model 5, is there's everything that's all the things that we've included in there are things we know about as a sort of varying degrees of possibility. I'd say 3 out of the 4 are getting very, very close. And then model 6 is basically we only got half of those rates from those things that we know about. So yeah, and as I said, I think we can definitely ensure this modelling up. But that was trying to give that sense of some of the things that are online.
Yep, still a large amount of borrowing sitting there, so it's not a quick runoff. of that. So I think that's the bit we need to focus on. Partly frames the discussion or decision today. So Laurie, I might pause you at this stage if you're okay with that and go to a couple of other committee members, and then I'll come back. So Pat.
I don't think I've got anything additional sort of covered. That's fine, more than fine.
Thank you, Pat. Pete?
I've already been involved in the discussion through the elected members, but it's been really, and I don't have anything more to add either, but it's interesting to get the feedback from the other committee members, just having a different lens on the whole situation.
Yeah, from my perspective, and I go to page 94, and I start at the revenue side. We seem to be very much focused around CPI as a base to justify rate increases, is my feel. And I don't know if that's the nexus that's been built here, and that's the message that then has gone out to the community. But when we look at it, we're not a CPI driven business. Yes, we've got CPI costs, but we've got retention, renewal, replacement, which sits outside of CPI. So to me, I think we've got to look at, do we need to start to break some of that nexus? I know you had a 2% COVID levy and those bits there, but it's always back to CPI, and people look at CPI where this is around, well, no, this is the base level of service. This is, yes, we've got costs, but we've got replenishment, renewal and development going forward. So I think we need to understand that a little bit more. Do we need to break that nexus? Because I then start to look through those revenue items, and your rate increase at the moment, I don't have an issue with it. That to me makes sense around that 8.5, 8.6%, irrespective of what CPI is doing. So I've sparked that at the moment, because to me it comes down to balance where the positions should be. I then look at your grants and subsidies and contributions. We're losing $1 million on what we got this year. So there's $1 million worth of revenue, and when you look at the ratios we're running, well, it's either comes out of cost or it's got to be made from the point of view of rates, which is again not a CPI. So how firm is that $7.5 million or 7,565? How guaranteed is that, or what could be the upside or downside with that number?
From an operating grants perspective, we normally only build in what we know about for sure. And when you say it, like what I would probably compare is to the 2023 adopted budget rather than the projected one. And the only reason I say that is because we tend to get one-off grants during the year that will have a one-off operating expenditure that sits next to it, and they'll just cancel each other out almost. So that, when you compare to the 2023 adopted budget, we have 7.7 million built in there. So it is a little bit lower. We may have dropped a couple of small ones, and actually it could even be our airport. At the moment, we will say that the airport model is built on being grant funded. We will have to swap that in the final model to be.
But you're saying that number's fairly firm there?
Yes, I would say there's nothing we've put in there that isn't going to be cheap, other than that airport one needing to change to user charges.
Yeah, because the problem you've got is, if we look at that, is this year we're underperforming when we're taking more grant money in place because of the overhead costs that have come through. So, you know, when we look at a budget of 1.9, we've got this extra grant money coming in of about 800,000. We're still going to have a deficit of 2.5. So part of it is around, yeah, I get that this was an overplay this year, but we haven't picked up the benefit of that overplay in the numbers from a grant point of view.
We normally wouldn't expect that from one-off grants. We normally, I'll just, like most of the grants we receive, so we've got our big grants that we sort of get generally each year, but anything sort of one-off that comes along, we don't normally expect to get a benefit from it, other than we deliver something we weren't otherwise going to deliver for the community. And it's normally a very specified program.
Yeah, but you've pulled something in this year. But I look at it, you're running a deficit in 2022 of 800,000. You're looking at running a deficit of about 1.9 this year, and you're going to do 2.5. And the next year, a deficit of 2. You know, to me, those numbers are not sustainable as we sit today. So to me, financial engineering needs to be done today, not in the future waiting for the revenue stream to come on board. So you start looking at those numbers and saying, well, The income side of it is really locked in with your rate increase of 8.65. Comes down now to your expenses to balance your number. And your employee costs, well, you've got your service provision. I get you've got your reviews, but we're not building anything in there for financial re-engineering activities. So what are we going to stop doing? What are we going to start doing? What are we going to modify? You're dependent on your service reviews for those at the moment. So you keep going down, and your 5% you've included, gut feel feels about right. I know you're going to go through an EA or an EV, and yes, CPI is a component in that, but it's also the marketplace within Whyalla. I'm not going to teach you how to do an EA because you guys know as well as I do. But around 5 gives you that flexibility of outperformance you need to reward as much as then dealing with, you know, the staff side of the business. So at 5%, that makes sense. You know, we're adding on depreciation costs nearly $500,000 to where we sit at the moment. So that comes back to Laurie's discussion as well. There's another load in there. And then borrowing costs are then adding another $500,000 as well. And I think you mentioned in the paper that a lot of your funding is fixed. You know, they've got a bit of a top up, but therefore, if the funding costs are doubling next year, it's either got to be through rate or volume. So I start looking through that and saying, well, we've got to potentially bring down the expense side. And how do we do that? I think we leave the rates where they are. CPI is not going to be at the number you've allowed in the budget. You know, they're talking about CPI being 4%, 3.9% at the end of 2023. So I think we can bring in a lower CPI number easily into the budget because CPI is already coming down. Because to me, I think we need to get to a position where the net deficit is purely what the airport is costing us. Because we've said the residents should not fund the airport, because you look at this is very much a business as usual budget. There's not a lot of out of the box we're investing. Therefore, it should be at least break even. We shouldn't be adding to debt. The line should be ruled around, we need to balance this piece here, knowing that the airport is a separate issue and a ratepayer should not be paying for that piece there. Run a deficit of 900,000 and look where we can then, and it's more around the rates we're using. And I think you get there if you start running your CPI numbers a little bit lower on your costs, because they're not going to be at the numbers you've got in there on the March figure. They're coming way down. You know, you look at the Westpac projections, where they're talking now, cash rate will be as well. What's happening with, you know, you've got the banking side of it happening in the US and the slowdown that's happening there. RBA will pause this month. So I think you can play, and it's not taking out any activity. It's more looking at what's your uplift price on your cost side of it. And I think you could get to a 900,000 deficit as the base case, then only adding a small amount to borrowing. So you're not betting on the future to get borrowings down. You're running within your money that you can spend at the moment. So I'll just put that on the table, and I'll be interested, Justin, as well as Grant, in relation to that discussion.
Couple of things there, just from my perspective from our budget. We've always used, so I agree, I know CPI is going to come down a long way over the coming quarters. I think we've always used March CPI, so we are flagged for the right point each year. So using CPI, so I definitely think we'll be probably below our 7.5% at March, but you know, I agree. I think a lot of that is going to flow off towards the end of 2023. But yeah, we'll obviously March every so that we are getting consistency across many of our contracts which have CPI clauses within them. And yeah, finance costs will probably drop off again. I think tweaking those things, I could see 1.1 million coming out of the budget. But yeah, I definitely agree. We know that our financial position is main discussions around where it sits and where it needs to go. But yeah, there's definitely not a huge amount, I think, that we can.
I'd go back and relook at that, because I don't get a feel for the amount you've got in here for projects as well, because you want to update your technology. We're talking here about service reviews. We're talking about audit programs. They're just going to add a layer of cost. Unlikely to get any payback in the first year of your service reviews. It's year 3 is your sweet spot on those activities. So to me, I'd say here's the target of 900,000 deficit. How can you get there? That would be my perspective.
The IT review, not factored in at all.
That's going to be its own funding. Yeah, discussion.
Yeah, and depending on what that model is like, it would potentially be the capital CapEx or operating, depending on what that final model looks like.
But you're talking 50 grand, potentially adding to an OPEX side of it once you look at the capital side of that, and then running the new technology platform. You know, we talked about your internal audit, your service reviews. There's a cost there on those pieces as well. So I'd be interested in the other committees' comments on what I just spoke about there, of setting that target, saying go back and look at how you could actually come. One, setting that as the baseline and the rationale, and then what would need to be done to get there. Back on your CPI, what's every 1% CPI give you? Do you know roughly?
In the rate increase?
No, ignore rate, because again, I want to break that nexus, operating expenses.
Yeah, so basically, if we were to drop 1% in CPI, we would expect our operating costs to drop only by about 90,000. I think it was because we're not looking into the wage increase right now, where we've built in a set cap, and so that wasn't affecting that part of the budget, only the contract material other.
I didn't mention before because it's not relevant for the operating vision, but I agree with the point that CPI should start to come down at some stage. What I was going to say is the issue that we've got is a lot of the services, particularly around infrastructure renewal, is actually coming in much higher than CPI. Didn't reference it before because it doesn't hit the operating, but I don't know if within that materials, contracts and other expenses, if there is any potential reduction if the heat comes out of CPI. Like Gavin's probably suggesting not, but back to the subject of overall rate increases and cost of service delivery, and I understand you wanting to follow the next with CPI when we talk about rates. We just need to be mindful that, particularly on the infrastructure side, the costs are actually going up more than CPI.
Yeah, so that adds to that argument.
And the bit I'd probably say is I think that's where we're trying to capture that page 82 and 83 of the document. The graph we've included there. What we're trying to do is show how our CPI does affect the different components of our budget, and also where they might be different from CPI. So I think a lot of the things we do are linked to CPI, but they might have a different factor on them. So CPI is a big driver of our costs, but where capital costs are changing more than CPI, and wages and capital are probably the two main things that we have experienced that others don't, which is what we've called our local government costs, and that tend to go up slightly higher than CPI in an average year. But this year we've shown that there's actually a slight downward push because of our assumption around wages. So we do try and update that every year and show those links and how we have. I mean, ultimately you can try and remove the link to CPI, but I think that's what people understand. And so what we try and explain is how we might differ from CPI and how we've arrived at that final decision. But there is, as I said, most of our items are linked in some way of CPI.
Yeah, you can build the layers up. Well, this is for renewal, this is, and so forth. But mine is you are building a legacy somebody else has to pay for. And I think you got to rule the line. It's gone on too long, and that's why you look at the rate increase coming through this year. That legacy is starting to catch up now, and if it keeps going on to, and where rates are going as well is highlighted from a financing cost point of view. You can't keep running at the level you're running on a business as usual budget. If you're running, saying we're developing this large master plan to do this, I get it, you can run a deficit because that's the value. When it's a BAU budget, you can't keep adding legacy that somebody else has got to pay for at some stage, from my perspective. I'd be interested, yes, Pat?
Just going back to our role and our concerns, and basically, obviously, it's the council to decide what it's going to do with its budget. But I think we can do our job by pointing out the things that we've put in our comments. I mean, we can't force a budget of any particular type, but we can point out as outside parameters. It's basically a budget, a business as usual budget. There's nothing that we can see that is looking at bringing it back within those. Then the council does with that what council will.
I think that's what today's discussion is. It's more forming those views, and I think there's been a large amount of information provided back around from it. I think the feel I'm getting from this committee's time to act is now in relation to pulling some of those back in relation to the overall operating result is not to run the deficit at the level we're looking at, is to reduce that deficit. Would that be the sentiment?
Yeah, to me, absolutely, or to see how we can prioritise other activities to try and bridge the gap, i.e. choices around how we allocate what we're doing with the services, whatever it is, for increasing priority around resources of grant income, whatever it may be, with that underlying basis that the level of deficit for BAU type activity.
Anything from you? I think you've got the general sentiment of the committee on that. You understand the position you're in and what you're trying to balance at the moment. And there is that forward projection going forward. And I know we've got those service reviews coming, it's going to help that line. But we're saying our position is there action needs to be done now. That component. Have you got enough there? Have I been specific enough? Are you looking?
I'm going to say no. Okay. In that I understand the sentiment of the discussion and the sense of urgency around wanting to do something now. I picked up Laurie's point that there should be greater prioritisation on those activities of council that may increase our revenue base, or where there could be some substantial reduction in costs. The latter one, at present, we're linking to the service reviews. So service reviews will drive to that second point. Beyond the service reviews and looking at where we can increase our revenue base either through increased property development and rates and or increased grant revenue, I just need a bit more clarification if there's something else the audit committee is recommending in terms of how we actually reduce our
Basically, the message is you can't have everything all the time, and everything you do is around making choices and decisions. And the choices and decisions that are made as someone new coming in are less sustainable than you've set as your own parameters, and that you probably would like to have. And as people coming in don't know what the best way of doing that is. Is there a way of prioritising and to find you're going to get grants, or is it working with the people that are coming to town to substantially increasing the sorts of rates? Is it there are assets that maybe can be offloaded that aren't within the requirements of council in the short or near term that bring in additional revenue to bridge the gap, so that you're reallocating your position? Now, I would say that we're probably not in the best position to tell you exactly which direction you've got to go, but to flag that they're the sort of things that could or should be considered as part of this process is probably what I think our role is.
From my perspective, Justin, would be to go back and say surplus of $2 million we think is the deficit of $2 million is too high. There needs to be income or expense items looked at And the income item is potentially a rate increase, further rate increase than what's proposed in the budget, although the council said 8.6 the number. Ours is, that number is too low when you look at the overall underlying outcome from that. And then on the expense side, it would be around what are the financial re-engineering opportunities. We accept your underlying assumptions that sit in there around staffing numbers and increases. What are some of the financial re-engineering activities that could be undertaken independent to those reviews that you're doing around delete, defer, modify to get to that position? So there is a decision around, no, we're not willing to do those, and we'll take the $2 million deficit. Are you comfortable with that, Laurie? Which parroted a lot of what you said.
I don't know how to word it.
Yeah, because you look at depreciation saying, yeah, okay, well, what potentially, you got 500,000 coming on that line from where we are this year. Okay, what could reduce that? By deferring or not doing it?
Yeah, they're the questions I guess that have been asked.
Yeah, and I suppose what I'm just struggling with just right here, right now, is how to answer those questions, because I can come back with some recommendations how we could save money, but it would talk to a reduction in services or service levels, potentially, or a change in the way that we're delivering services, which the council may not be comfortable with, and I'd be doing that in the absence of the service reviews. And I'm currently thinking I need that service review undertaken to be able to provide the rationale. For an example, just as an example, we could put under the one roof visitor information centre, customer service, and the library. Council can make a strategic decision to say those three services are going to be under one roof, and we're going to have one group of people delivering those three services, as opposed to three separate groups, three separate teams. There would be, in my mind, savings that could be achieved from that, but it would have an impact in terms of service levels and the way that council delivers the service. I can sit here and say I can make those savings, but that's me sitting here making that statement with nothing to lean back on other than some assumptions and some calculations done internally. I know the council would not be comfortable making that decision. Then a piece of work to provide the pros and cons and the benefits of that service delivery model. And then the obvious question, is that the most appropriate service delivery model, or could there be another way of delivering some of those services, one or all, which is what we're looking to the service reviews as a vehicle to provide that information to inform those decisions of council. So the statements from the audit committee ultimately to the council that things need to be done is fine. It's probably a question of how and when we can make those things happen.
Another way of potentially looking at it, and again, we're not going to get into how you do your job either on that. That's in your realm. But if we look at depreciation and finance costs, we've got an extra $1 million next year. Part of that may be, well, until we undertake the service reviews and identify where the savings are, we have to pare back whatever the schedule of works is, that we don't add further to depreciation and financing costs where we sit this year. So it's going to, so the service reviews funds activity that were previously core part of the budget. Until you can self-fund it, you don't do it. That's the bit I'd say go back and look at your numbers is, okay, of these, without significantly re-engineering the business, what could you do? It may be an extra percentage points on rates. It may be we defer these programs from a activity point of view until we've done the services reviews, so we can fund it, so we're not adding depreciation and finance costs. That's one way of doing it.
On that note, can you talk to the depreciation figure, why it's gone up? Is it because of the revaluation periodically and the increased cost of renewal? Is that what's giving rise to that?
Yeah, there will be some factor in there of depreciation from new assets being built. The average probably about 2 to 2.5% of whatever our new upgrade spend is be flowing through there. But the big chunk of that increase will just be the natural indexation of asset values and the depreciation increase from that. The depreciation figure goes up every year because our asset values are indexed every year. So
I'm just doing the very many sort of interpretation. The new assets that we're looking at is the new surf life saving club down on the foreshore, a significant upgrade of Point Lowly cottages. Is there any other new assets? Where I'm going with this is painting a picture that those new assets are things that council has consciously decided to invest in the past. Pragmatic interpretation of what this discussion is that we press pause on those projects, given our current financial position, and put that back to council to consider that.
We don't want to be directive on what's in and what's out. More around the end position needs to change, and this is some of the way to think about how you change that position. So I think that's the feedback, rather than going through that's in, that's out.
That's my take. It's incumbent on management to say we're outside of the parameters, and the options that we have available to us to go back within those parameters are A, B, C, and we recommend A or B or C, and the council will make the decision to say, you know what, we're happy with where we're at, we continue to go. And I guess what we're doing as a committee is saying, at least we know there's a process that we've thought about it and what we need to do to stay within those parameters. And you then are making an informed decision to go down that road. As said before, we can't tell you how to spend your money or where to spend it or not spend it, but we can put in a process to say the parameters you've set have been set for a reason, and you're outside of those for whatever reason, and here are the options available to us. And they may be changes to service levels, they may be, there's a thing around a sale of an asset, they may be around ceasing activities for a period of time, they may be around just reprioritising activities. That's for, I think, the management team to look at. But at least when it's going forward and it's being endorsed on an informed basis to say there's a trade-off that's being made here, or there is none, but the consequences are going to be X, Y, or Z.
Back through that. So then I suppose the question is process. So we could identify ways of getting back into those parameters, but that would be significant considerations for council. The question I've got now is the process. Do you want to try and document that now, or do you want to give us the responsibility to go away and come back to another meeting, which is not suggested?
When's the next council meeting?
Well, the council won't make the final decision on the budget until the end of June. We are about to commence community consultation, so that's a sort of a significant juncture. Starting a community consultation, we could make it clear that the audit committee and the council have sought additional information about how we can reduce our deficit. So the consultation can be subject to further discussions or consideration of those considerations, including potential service levels and the like. The next audit committee is scheduled for May.
Let's just step back a little bit. So when will the council see this?
2 weeks time.
Well, I think you take this plan to it without comments, and council may say, no, we've set what we've set around rates, and we're generally comfortable with running at that level going forward, take into account the audit committees and risk committees outcomes, or they may say, we agree with that, management, you have to go away and look at that to then bring it back to us. So that to me is the way you drive it.
Yeah. Which then presents a challenge. We need to then write up what A, B, C and D and E and F and G might be.
We don't have to say A, B, C and D as in, we don't do any work on the childcare centre or whatever. you take the points that actually Laurie made, which was you're out, the committee notes, you're outside the parameters that, absent any additional increase in rates, consideration would have to be given to other forms of income, or,
There is no resolution for us to put a.
no, but they're the points that we
Really,
need.
here's the comments captured in the minutes.
Yep.
So I don't think we need to formalise this. You've had the discussion, there should be a heap of comments. We'll issue those to the committee to say, here's the minutes. Are we comfortable with the committee discussed and identified XXS in the minutes?
Yeah, so you could adjust recommendation two to say that they recommend to council that bit, but then in the end say, subject to council's consideration of the audit committee's discussion around.
Taking into consideration the discussion of the audit committee.
Yeah.
Our recommendation is that the council take into consideration the committee's discussion at its meeting today on the plan as part of their approval of the plan. That's basically what we're saying.
Yeah. And documenting the discussion, do you want to do that in the form of these minutes or as a separate?
We'll capture it in the minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Subject to the council's consideration of the audit risk committee's discussion, which I think that's way to capture it.
Well, I'd go the other way, saying the recommendation is that the council considers the audit risk committee's discussion on the draft 2023-24 annual budget plan and business prior to approving the budget.
Sort of easier for us, but it's probably harder for council.
Yeah, I believe that you have to recommend.
If you went back over, I mean, Laurie, I think summarised it quite beautifully.
Don't ask me to do it again, but
No, but it's,
so if we,
Yeah.
for the minutes, secretary's capturing of the discussion, did you want to provide some words, or do you want me to?
Or we should have all the words of what we've discussed and we can just filter down.
Okay, so if you can start typing the set.
Well, we don't want it now because we're going to spend time doing that.
Yeah. So you do that offline?
Do that offline, yeah. And
Okay.
hopefully you've captured what Laurie said, what Pat said,
Yeah.
Pete and myself in those minutes, and we can refine those.
Yeah.
But it does come down to the recommendation. I think the recommendation is that we're not supporting the budget in its current form. We're saying go back and look at it.
and bring back to council the options.
Around financial re-engineering
Yeah.
to reduce the financial re-engineering of both the revenue and expense line to reduce the level of borrowings. Reduce the level of deficit.
Just, I don't know if we'll get a public consultation for that. What we don't recommend that council. I don't think it's consultations.
Sorry, just remind me, has council already endorsed the annual business plan for the purpose of the consultation?
No, they gave us they passed a resolution on what basis they want to prepare on, but no, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
So it's.
Yeah, and that's going to the next council meeting.
Yeah.
So that's fine. The timing will be right. So as you've indicated, is that council considers the discussion, which includes, focus on financial
Re-engineering activities,
Yeah.
yep, to reduce the deficit
Yeah.
to 23.
So we'll capture all those words
Yeah.
in terms of some of the items that sit underneath that. And I think that is full stop.
Yep.
And that's what the recommendation of this audit committee is at this point in time. So you're not endorsing the draft budget because of the concerns.
Yes.
You're just saying, please, council, consider these points.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it may come back to us in May saying we have considered or council are at this point here. And if that's the parameters we work in, we may endorse it at that point.
we were never asked to endorse it. If you have a look at those recommendations, all we were asked to do is comment on it and endorse it. It goes out to public consultation, but it could go out to public consultation with comments that we've asked.
Yeah, so I don't think that changes anything. But that's okay.
And the council may say, no, we're comfortable.
Yeah, that's the same.
They're not increasing rates anymore. All right, thank you for that. Thank you for that work done on those, the draft grant.
So if we can now just get a mover and seconder.
So we'll tie this one up. Can we have a mover of that motion? Thanks, Pete. Seconder, Laurie. All those in favour? Thank you, everybody.
And just through the chair, we do have lunch, and I don't know if you want to take a short refreshment break.
We might take 10 minutes, grab a sandwich. We might get
So if you can just get someone to move and second that, we suspend the meeting for up to 15 minutes for
Okay.
refreshment.
we
Stop.
suspend the meeting 15 minutes. Thank you, Laurie. Second, Pat. At 11:36. So we'll move on to the airport operating results. Justin, I think you're going to take this one, or Grant, are you going to take it?
I can take this one. So, yeah, so basically this was bringing a report back just to, this was actually the previous audit committee had asked for this report. So what we're dealing with at the airport is due to some of the conditions of our grant funding, the sort of traffic and assets that we have that are on our asset register and that we depreciate, but that we really shouldn't be generating any income for because the government paid for the assets. And that's basically what's written into the grant agreements. So that's for our security equipment and some of the building mention that we did to fit that security screening. And so this is just sort of getting an understanding of what the impact of that is, bringing that to the committee and building some agreement around accepting that the airport probably needs to run at a certain level of deficit over a number of years because of those impacts. Because if we do start, not that we're at that point at the moment, we're actually got a bigger deficit than in the plan at the moment. But if in theory we were charging for those amounts, then we are not meeting our funding requirements. And then I guess from a longer term point of view, what does that mean? I think the assumption that we would put in around the screening equipment is that the government gave it to us this time. We don't charge the customers or users of the thing for that equipment because that's what our grant agreement says. And we would expect that when that equipment comes towards end of life, that either the government would again supply that equipment, or if they didn't and we needed to buy that equipment next time, that would start charging customers for it from that time. But that's when it's the into the user charges. So the building itself, I think we can phase that out over time, and it's probably a small part of that $200,000 impact that's mentioned in here. But the equipment itself is probably only got a 10 to 15 year life on it, at which time then we'll have to decide at that point of view what we do, depending on the government's direction.
Thanks, Grant. We'll go to any questions, Pete?
Yeah, just quickly, given the fact that it's not getting as much traffic as you would have planned or budgeted, would that potentially extend the life of any of the assets, or is it just technology that will be superseded and be covered in exchange depreciation?
My view is that it probably doesn't actually greatly affect the useful life. More of this things are either warranties running up as well. That those sorts of things, technology changes, especially in the airport field, they change quite a lot. I can't see the life being pushed out. Like I said, we've never had this equipment before, so we've sort of had to estimate it based on industry standards, that useful life. The building itself, I mean, less traffic is probably buildings. Unfortunately, most of the airport costs are fixed, and that's the challenge with managing an airport, especially in current conditions recovering from COVID.
No, I think I'm okay. I mean, basically what we're saying is we've got certain things as a result of getting grants. The grant said we can't charge for that, but that doesn't mean that we can't depreciate or shouldn't depreciate at whatever is the value, and that therefore it's technically a loss. Really. There's just an accounting to accommodate placing those assets, which we might not have to pay for. So the ratepayers aren't really subsidising the airport. Sense so long as in the end we get things replaced for free. Sense to me.
Once you finish discussing the operating results, I'd like to maybe go into confidence and get where we're screening.
So from a cash flow point of view, we're no worse off. Purely, we're seeing that run through the operating position of the organisation.
That's right, grants came in previously and were recognised as a revenue item grant.
Yep.
Yeah, and how we're dealing with the loss of that.
Okay. All right. We have a resolution there. Can I have a mover? Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Laurie. Second. All those in favour? Approved. Thank you. We'll now move the motion and go into confidence. Can I have a mover? Thanks, Pat. Seconder. Thanks, Laurie. Vote on that. Okay, we're now in confidence. Item 4.1, Nicholson Avenue. Who would like to know that? Can we do the confirmation? We move back in.
So we've done that, but now we're going into, we need to get someone to move that we deal with this matter in confidence.
Oh, okay. So should we come out?
Yes, you do, because you need to do this resolution in public.
Okay. Resolution will go back into confidence for a different matter. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, Peter. All.
So do you want to go into a breakout room?
And have you got the technology working now?
Yep.
Are you going to exclude anyone online, or?
According to the report, yourselves, Kathy, Kristen, Jade, myself, Grant, Sandra, Lisette are all included. Everybody else is excluded.
Make us move.
Whether you want people being around us.
Yeah, look, I think given the people online, I'm happy just to have them.
I think I agree, Justin. Everyone can go into confidence, I think.
Okay, we have no motions without notice. We've got any motions? Sorry, we've got no motions with notice. We've got any without. I'll scratch your head when I ask a question. I'll go to you. All good. All right, we'll close the meeting at 3:02. It's not bad. Next meeting is 8th of May. Thank you, everybody, for a long meeting and your participation. Well done to management for your resources.